won't be the first time. I'm so glad we have a podium. Yeah. You'd be surprised how many people stuff. People have suitcases, like entire. Like, how do you do that? You want to use the clicking? Yeah, I think it's good to have the clicker. Okay. Let's get you connected here. Yeah. Oh, just a minute. This like seems to be. Great. And now we have Beth Shear from Homebrew is going to talk about hiring. That was a nice sort of segue, Sue, that came up in Sue's Q&A. So now you can kind of drill down a bit deeper and talk about some hiring best practices for your pre-Series A team. Okay, great. So please, round of applause for Beth. Here you go.
Is this working? Great. I apologize for my voice. I'm a little bit under the weather, and I've been parenting solo for 2 weeks, so I have lost my mind as well as my voice. So bear with me.
Do you need to look at that?
No, I can look at this. Sure. You tell me where to go.
Body so that you're kind of facing this way a little bit.
Sure.
So those folks can see you too. Great.
So some of you look familiar because I've actually been watching you guys on video today, which is pretty cool. So I know most of you don't know who I am, but it's kind of cool to see some familiar faces. So my name is Beth Shear, and I work at Homebrew Ventures, which is a small seed stage firm here in San Francisco. Some of you may know who my partners are, Hunter Walk and Satya Patel. Hunter has, I think, over like 200,000 Twitter followers. I think I have 4. So if any of you follow me after today, that would be awesome, because I can tell Hunter that I'm catching up with him. My handle, it'll be at the end, but it's at Homebrew Beth, I think. It'll be on the last slide. Clearly, I am not that much of an active user. But my email, my Homebrew Beth, thank you. It'll be on the last slide, I promise. And my email, too. I know sometimes, like, after these, people come talk to me. I do have to race out of here, and I apologize, because I would love to meet some of you. But, I would like to meet all of you, not just some of you. Things are going really well. So please feel free to email me. I promise I will get back to anyone who emails me, but I do give my contact information at the end. So a little bit about me, just, who I am and why I'm sitting here. I've been at Homebrew 3 years. I'm their head of talent. And for any of you who do end up moving forward and getting funding, chances are you'll end up working with somebody who is a talent partner or a head of talent at a venture capital firm. And I'll tell you a little bit about my role, but before that, just a little bit about me. I joined a company in 2003 down in Mountain View that was 1,200 people, and that company was Google. And my job was to help hire for this team that they were building called the AdSense team. I was there for 6 years. I was part of quite a few groups there. After I built the AdSense team, I went to corporate marketing, I went to google.org, then I went to business operations, and then I had a child, and then I came back, and then they threw me over to the engineering side of the business, which I thought was absolutely crazy because I was a psychology major from a liberal arts college. And that's what they just sort of did at that company. They said, you solved a problem with this group, we're going to send you over to another group. So I did that for 6 years. It was pretty incredible experience. When I left, the company was, I think, around 17,000 people, and now it's over, 60,000 people. So that was tremendous growth. And I never was really a big company person. And I was commuting from San Francisco. I live in the city. And I wanted to be in San Francisco and not have to commute anymore and go to a smaller company. So I was hired by the largest tech employer in San Francisco, Salesforce, which was my first job at Salesforce. Was actually in this building. We didn't have the big tower that they just built. And we were 3,500 people. When I left Salesforce 3 years ago, they were around 22,000 people. So I tend to go to these companies that I think are nice and small, and they get really, really big. But it is safe to say that Homebrew is 4 people, and we are not going to get any bigger, maybe by 1 person, but small is good. We just raised our 3rd fund in February, and we have about 35 companies in our portfolio. So what is my role and what do I do all day? Because I don't do the recruiting. And that's the first thing people say is, oh, well, you're a talent partner. Do you do the recruiting for all of your companies? I never would have left my job at Salesforce to do that. My last 2 years there, I spent running executive search. Before that, I recruited for marketing alliances, marketing ops. I did sales leadership, nothing on the engineering side over there. So my job in 3 buckets is pretty simple. I do a lot of counseling. Everyone calls me the talent therapist. So anytime we bring on a new company, whether it's a first-time founder, because we have quite a few first-time founders in our portfolio, or a third-time founder, my job is to help them think about all things talent. And that's a pretty vague bucket. I've never had any formal HR experience, but I do know when to call legal, and I know when to refer them to somebody else if I'm about to give them bad advice, which happens a lot because they call me with things I know nothing about, and I'm not good at BSing. I just say, this is out of my spectrum. So, let's get some help from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. But anything recruiting related, compensation, performance management, diversity and inclusion, onboarding, executive recruiting, those things I can handle. So I spend a lot of time counseling in those areas. Then the other bucket is connecting. My job is really to maintain networks of people in functional areas where we can be helpful. Now, at the seed stage, we're mainly doing our companies are mainly doing hiring in engineering and ops. We're not hiring marketing people. We're not hiring customer success. Maybe we're hiring a salesperson. And I'm going to take you through a chart, actually, of what we actually are hiring at the seed stage, because our job as seed investors is to get our companies to the Series A. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. So connecting our founders with what excellent looks like. When a founder comes to me and says, we're thinking about hiring a VP of product, I've never done that before. This a lot of times happens when we have non-technical founders. They don't know how to do it. What does a VP of engineering look like? So I say, you know what? I'm going to introduce you to 5 people. They're not looking, but I want to show you what a really good VP of product looks like. So we get them talking to people. Same thing with VP of finance. A lot of our companies, our founders have just never talked to anybody like this, especially if they're a technical founder. They don't know how to hire a VP of finance or a VP of marketing. So it's my job to get them really familiar with the role so that when they're ready to hire, they know what excellent looks like. And then the last piece of what I do is content. If you go to our website, and we are going to be updating our website right now, so some of the things I talk about, you may have a hard time finding them. And if I mention something you can't find, please email me and I will help you find it. So I do a lot of writing about things and creating guides for not just our portfolio companies, but for people like you who may live in places where you don't have a strong startup community. So I'm curious, how many of you guys live in places where you feel like you don't really have a network? Okay, not too many of you. But if you're living in a small town in Alabama or Florida and there's not really a thriving tech scene, it's nice to be able to go to a place where you constantly have information. And we want to be known as a venture capital firm that supplies that information. So if you go to the Homebrew website I think it's under viewpoints, you will find guides on everything from performance management, a startup's guide to HR policies. I wrote one about like what to do if you lose your job, how to source, how to think about performance management, compensation, a lot of different things. And like I said, we're redoing our website, so it's going to be a lot more organized. So if you talk to other talent partners at some of the bigger firms, their roles are going to be different. And that's mainly because we're small, we can go really deep. I know all of our founders. They can call me anytime, and it does happen, but I like that about my job. I work a lot, but I have a really flexible job. And with every one of our founders, I can develop a really deep personal relationship. It's less transactional. So if I get pulled in, let's say one of our companies is doing a VP of engineering search, I'm going in really deep with that search. They're not just calling me and saying, hey, should we use an executive firm? Who is that? And then I don't hear about it. I'm on every weekly status call, usually for the first couple searches. By the time they're, a year in and they've done one search, maybe they won't call me for the next one. If it's a second or third time founder, maybe they had a really bad experience before, so they won't need me as much. But it really depends. I will help as much as a founder needs. Sometimes founders don't really understand what I do, and when I try to explain, they don't really think they need my help. But at the 11th hour, when everything goes to what, that's when I usually get the call. So I'm always available. Didn't this happen before? Least technical person in Silicon Valley.
It's like, I'm not much better, to be honest. I think you just want to play it again, right?
Yeah, okay. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about, actually we're going to cover 3 areas. We're going to talk about when you're getting from seed stage to Series A. We're going to cover building a well-rounded team, building a diverse team, and how you prioritize recruiting. So when we talk about building a well-rounded team, when you're at the seed stage, you really need to think about hiring you need to think about hiring people that can pivot versus hiring people who are deep experts in things. Because as you guys know, as founders, you're doing everything. And if you hire people that are really, really deep specialists early on, they're going to get bored and they're not going to be able to pivot. Diversity. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on this today. Why is it important? It's not about optics. So what really happens when you actually hire a team that has people who think differently about things? What's the ROI? And finally, how do you actually prioritize recruiting as a founder? How many of you guys actually spend 50% of your time recruiting in the seed stages? Raise your hand. 50%. Does anyone spend more than 50% of their time recruiting? Okay. Yeah. So when I sit down with our founders, especially first-time founders, and say, okay, seed stage, you've got these positions to get through. You're going to need to spend, and usually we only invest in co-founders or 3 founders. We tend to not to invest in solo founders. We have made exceptions. I say you're going to need to spend at least 40% of your time recruiting. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And then they look at each other and they say, well, hey, what if we each spend 20% of our time recruiting? I say, no, you actually can't divide it up like that. I realize that's a lot of time. You've got a business to build, but that's what it takes if you're not getting any external help. So when we talk about building a well-rounded team, I think the best example of this is when we look at the sales function. Hiring, somebody with breadth of knowledge versus depth of knowledge. So when a seed stage founder comes to me and says, we need a VP of sales and we need it now, and I say, whoa, a VP of sales is somebody who comes in, has a team, and they're basically managing a team. You need somebody who's a player and a coach. So a lot of times in the seed stage and even in the Series A, you see the title head of. And what that really means is somebody who can be an individual contributor, but they also have managed so they can do both. Again, it's somebody who can pivot and go back and forth. Most of the time when somebody joins a late seed stage company and they want to come in as a head of, they're willing, after having managed a team, to take a step and be an individual contributor and know that they get to build from the ground up. And their number one reason for wanting to leave a bigger company is so they can have impact and a seat at the table. So what I do is when we're trying to close somebody who's coming from a Google or a Facebook and making 3 times as much, is we really figure out, okay, money is not the number one driver. It's impact and seat at the table. So that sort of leads into the closing conversation. Diversity. If you remember anything from the talk I give today, I want you to think about intentionality and starting early. One of the cool things about working at a seed stage firm is we get to start to work with founders before things get bad and before they've made mistakes. I can't imagine working in private equity when companies are already so big. So I get to work with companies before they're 10 people. And when companies come to me, when it's usually founders and maybe a couple engineers in the case of our companies, and they say, all right, we're ready to hire, we want to start sourcing. Right then and there is a perfect opportunity for me to have the conversation. Okay, how do you think about sourcing? What's been working and what's not? And usually we talk about how they've been sourcing from their own network. Nothing wrong with that. As a founder, you're moving hard, you're moving fast, you're probably having former colleagues, friends from graduate school, friends from undergraduate school, professors reaching out to you and giving you referrals. But if you only source from your network, what's going to happen is you're going to have a group of like-minded people. It's not just about visible diversity. Now, I know I'm sitting in a room with a lot of female founders, and obviously I thought about that before I came in here. Homebrew actually has quite a few companies that are female founders. We've got the Skim. Do we have any Skim readers in the room? Yay. Okay. We have another company called Primary, which is a children's clothing company in New York. We also have a company here in San Francisco called Winnie, which is sort of like a Yelp for parents. And we have a company in Boston called BioBot. So one of the things that the Skim had to think about, Carly Zakin and Danielle Weisberg, when they started the company, I think about 5 years ago, they cater to a female millennial audience primarily. And I talked to Danielle about this when I was asked to give a talk a while ago, and she gave me this quote that I wanted to share with you guys, because here they are, 2 female millennial founders, their audience, which is now over 7 million people, not all female millennials, but that is the primary demographic of the audience. And Danielle said, it's really important to us that we establish the Skim as a company with gender diversity. Of our first 5 hires, 2 were male. We didn't want to create a company where the only people working there were in the demo it served. We want to make sure that we always have people with different backgrounds and perspective to challenge our thinking. So why does any of this matter? Is it so we can put, on our website that we have really good diversity numbers? No. There are actually things that will help in terms of the ROI. It improves problem solving, drives innovation. It's going to be much easier to attract talent. If you have 8 men on the team and you're trying to hire a woman, it's going to be much easier when you're 8 women than 80 women, and vice versa. And also return on equity. And we know all of this from studies done. There's a University of Michigan study, a Forbes study. Normally I read all these studies, but I'm not going today because of my voice, and you guys are probably going to get bored. And I know that Jackie's going to hand out the deck. But I do think the last one is really important. Companies with inclusive boards have higher return on equity than companies who lack D&I on boards. And that was a McKinsey study done about 6 years ago. So how do we do this? I actually want to make this talk practical so everyone walks out of here like, okay, she talked a lot about studies, but I want to know what I can do so that I'm creating a diverse and inclusive environment. So first, it starts with your go-to-market strategy. You've got a job description for a role you want to fill. You guys have probably heard of Textio. If you haven't heard of it, write it down because it's something you should be using with all of your job descriptions. You may not know this, but your job descriptions are probably biased. They may be biased towards females. They may be biased towards males. So it's a machine learning tool, came out a couple years ago. Textio, Textio. Sure, and I think you can try it for free. And what it does is it basically looks at all the words you use and tells you if your job description skews masculine or feminine. So there's the obvious. If you use a word like competitive, hacker, ninja, dominant, that means your job description is probably going to skew towards male. But can anyone say what they think would skew towards female? You may be surprised. How about loyal? Responsible, connected, and trust. All right. How do you prepare the candidates? So, in order to prepare the candidates to have an unbiased process, you need to be consistent and you need to be transparent. So what that means is what you do for one candidate, make sure you do for everyone. So the first thing is you would need to have a schedule for everybody. And I know this seems really basic. You're like, why is she telling us to give a schedule? But you'd be surprised. How many times have you gone on an interview and you get nothing? You don't even know who you're meeting with. You don't know what time you're supposed to be there because, you've gotten two different messages. So it's really important that everybody has the same thing. So we always recommend, sending a schedule the night before with a note, whoever you think you're meeting with, it may change due to schedules. We always provide the bios. I got a question from somebody when I was chatting, and they said, well, why would you give the bios? Isn't it up for the candidate to have to research? Don't you kind of want to test them? And I said, you know what? I've been doing this a long time. I believe you should try to set people up for success. So you can give them the LinkedIn, they can look it up, but don't make the people do any more work than they have to. Chances are you're going to be giving them either a technical interview or a writing sample. They're going to have to do enough work. Tell them who they're meeting. It may change. The other thing you really need to be careful about is how you're preparing the interview team. We've all gone to interviews where you sit down and meet with somebody and they have no idea who you are and what you do. And that feels pretty shitty. So what I think is really important, and you probably not going to have an HR person, you're probably not even going to have a recruiter when you're 5 people. So it's really important the hiring manager make sure that the resume is circulated to everybody and that the interview team is not all asking the same questions. So how many of you guys use what's called a hiring rubric? Does anyone know what a hiring rubric is? Want to explain it? Anyone? Yes. And without a rubric, you have a bias. So if you're not using a rubric right now, your hiring process is biased. So you're like, well, where do R? I always spell it wrong for the record. It's R-U-B as in boy, R-I-C. It's a tool that basically outlines specific expectations for varying levels of competency. And when I wrote up a guide on sourcing and hiring, I attached a link to a very basic rubric. If you look up, in Google Images, hiring rubrics, you're going to get a ton. You may like a different one, but the one I gave, it might even be from Stripe. It's very simple and easy. But if you're not using one, your interview process is biased. So your interview team should be using one. The other thing is, if you're a team of all females and you're interviewing a male, you should have a male on the team. But you're thinking, well, wait, Beth, we don't have any males on the team. Bring in somebody from your advisory board or your investor community. I would tell the same of any male team. It's very helpful to do that. Even if they're interviewing for a marketing role and you don't have anybody on your team who knows anything about marketing, have them do a cultural assessment. If it's an investor, leverage that experience. Have them talk about why they invested in your company. It's really, really important to do that. Probably not. I wouldn't bring an investor in on a first interview. You want to be mindful of their time. I should have been clear about that. Probably if you think they're going to be a finalist candidate, I wouldn't wait and use them for the close. I would definitely do that maybe on a third round. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The question was, is that so the candidate feels more comfortable? Yes, and it also shows that you don't just have females in your network. You are asking questions and thinking about, the concept of diversity and inclusion, because the types of questions that you guys would be asking if you're all females, it's one perspective. And I would say the same thing to a group of, males. I get asked to do interviews, for VP of engineering candidates. I don't have an engineering background, but what I do is talk about why we invested. Any other questions on that? I know it sometimes feels a little bit forced. Hi. Hi.
We subscribe to the WHO hiring method, the 4 interviews, very structured. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No, I'm not, but I'll check it out.
But I'm specifically wondering how kind of regimented you think the interviews should go, or if you think it should be more adapted to the people you're interviewing.
Well, I think it should be adapted to the culture of the company.
Okay. And then between candidates?
It depends. I mean, yeah, if you're interviewing, and you should have a process for engineers versus a process for your ops candidate versus a process for marketing. But when you're I don't know how many people you have at your company.
We're 5,
right.
3 part-time.
So it's not going to vary that much. You really can't, because you only have so many people. But I mean, the types of questions, and once you get that rubric, you'll be able to figure out what you want to make sure is that, you don't have 2 people asking the candidate the same questions, because that is a huge turnoff in a bad candidate experience.
Okay. And then how many interviews do you think are necessary before you actually bring them on?
Well, if it's for what I recommend is a phone screen. You bring somebody in. If you only have 5 people, they should meet you can do it in one day and do the technical interview, and then maybe they come back for a lunch or a dinner with the founder. You want to get them out of the office too.
Thank you.
You want to get to know them a little bit outside of the office.
Oh, sorry. I'll sprint across sorry.
Thank you. Just on the topic of being unbiased in the interview process, a lot of the time interested in candidates would ask me for a coffee meeting first before they apply for the job position.
They would
officially.
ask you as the founder.
Correct.
Interesting.
And or they won't even. So sometimes they'll be they'll just be blunt, like, I'm interested in this job. Can we grab a coffee first?
And are they a passive or an active candidate? Did you reach out to them, or did they reach out to you?
Both situations.
Okay.
And so oftentimes I'm like, I shouldn't do this because it'll bias the interview. But then if you say no, it's like you're being very cold.
Why would it bias the interview?
Because because other candidates in the interview that I'm going to interview, I've never met before. It'll be our first time meeting, getting to know them.
Maybe they're just more comfortable getting coffee outside of the office. If it's a director or above candidate and they prefer to get coffee versus coming in, I would be open to it in the very early stages. Maybe they're really busy and they don't want to, come in for the full day. I think that's okay in the really early stages. But I think once you're more than 10 people and you're really running a more regimented process, that wouldn't be okay. But I think about our VP of engineering at, I'm thinking one of our New York companies, he's constantly getting coffee with candidates, building his network. I think as long as you're driving the process, and you can say, look, this is not how we normally do interviews, but I'm happy to meet you on an informational basis, but this is not part of the formal interview process. You need to make it clear that it's informal. And I wouldn't take notes during the coffee. You're just basically getting a, do I want to go on a second date kind of thing. But it's informal. The last thing is preparing the environment. And people always laugh when I talk about this and they think it's really sort of stupid, but I've actually been really turned off. Some companies I've interviewed at where I've walked in, there's been no one to greet me. Again, I realize there's not going to be a receptionist at, an early stage company, but if you walk in and you knock and nobody comes for 5 minutes and there's nowhere to sit, that can be sort of a turnoff. There should be somebody to greet you, whether it's the hiring manager, an intern, the founder, and look around. It's important to pay attention to your surroundings. My favorite story is when I first started at Homebrew, we had a company that was in the Mission in this apartment, and I went to go say hi. It was all male, and I didn't know if it was an apartment or what it was, but I knocked on the door and I realized the door was open, and I was like, great security system. It was right on Valencia, and I walked up, and they were all just sort of sitting there, and the place was kind of messy, but whatever, no big deal. It was a startup. And then I asked if I could use the bathroom, and I walked in. I was like, oh, my God. I was like, there is no way, male or female, anyone would want to work here. And being the neurotic Jewish mother that I am, I walked out, and I was like, guys, we're not talking about hiring. We're going to talk about how to clean a bathroom. Like, literally, the place was such a pigsty. They had no toilet paper. I mean, you cannot interview people if no one wants to use your bathroom. It was so disgusting. So again, make sure that you have an environment that you would want, an investor, a potential investor to use. So that's my speech on environment. One question. Oh, go ahead. Sure, it's not related to cleaning bathrooms.
So I think this problem that I face, probably many people here face, when we are in early stage and we only have budget to have like 2 or 3 full-time people, that we need that person to be kind of this ninja that does everything. So my biggest challenge is, I just can't, I don't find any other person like me who's a multitasker.
Right.
Every time I hire, it's like, so I need somebody who can do 30% operations, 30% teaching, 30% curriculum design.
Right.
And every time, they all say, yes, we do the interview. I have them do 1 week volunteer. Everything is wonderful. Then 2 weeks into it, one
They're like,
person
I want to be
said,
the VP of marketing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Forget, the millennials for sure. Yeah. And then they're
Now.
I want my equity.
Now.
I want unlimited vacation. They want all that. But plus they say, I don't think teaching is a good use of my time.
Right.
Can I just focus on operations? Or the operations person will say, I don't think curriculum is really my thing. I don't enjoy it. And it's like, well, we discussed this before.
Right.
How do you do?
I mean, one way you can screen for that is for other people who've worked in startups and actually worked to scale. They've been in companies that have scaled, and they've actually done that before and want to do it again. Back channel references. If you're not doing back channel references on somebody, don't hire them. And I can talk more about that if we have time. But somebody right out of 2 years out of school who says that, there's a very good chance. We don't hire a lot of people with no industry experience at seed stage companies because there's no structure. There's no hand holding. So most of the folks we hire are, I would say 4 to 6 years experience, because you can't come to a seed stage company and expect to have your hand held. So we tend to hire people that actually have either managed teams but want to be an IC. I mean, we have some people that have been engineers for 20 years and they're like, I don't want to manage anymore. People are a pain. I want to come and be an IC and just do my thing. They're grown-ups. So, hi, Amy. Cool.
What do you suggest? We are in a seed stage, and what do you suggest then for kind of transitioning an intern who's, given you that 4 to 6 months, but is clearly not in that gap of the 4 to 6 years of experience, but you're still trying to convert them into a paid part-time employee. Is it worthwhile to cultivate them after having invested in an internship?
I don't see where internships work unless there's a solid mentorship program. And with our companies, except for our Series C companies, the Skim has an internship program. There's 70 people. Our seed stage companies, they don't have any time to mentor interns. So when I get calls from people saying, I want to be an intern at your companies, I say, you know what? You need to be contacting the later stage venture capital firms. It doesn't work for our companies. And I'm sure there are people that disagree with me, but it doesn't work for our companies because you don't have people that have the time to mentor and manage. We need to hire industry experienced people. Okay. do we need to hire an HR person? We're 12 people. We're freaking out. We have all these employee relations issues and benefits. The short answer is you need to hire an HR person, but not until you're 30 people. Now, I know we have somebody from the military in the room because I watched her pitch earlier, and it was great. And I don't want to get this wrong, but so the reason you need to hire an HR person when you're 30 people. So that could be Series A, could be Series B, depending on, how fast you grow. So why is it 30 people? So when you have 8 to 12 people at a company, 8 to 12 is a squad, and you need a sergeant. Did I get that right? Squad leader. Okay. And then when you're 15 to 30 people, you have a platoon, and you need a lieutenant. Platoon. Okay. I was close. So 30 people, you need that lieutenant. So that's what your HR manager does. He or she is not running all of recruiting. That person is dealing with compliance, benefits, onboarding, setting up systems, HRS systems. This is not sexy stuff, but it's stuff that's got to get done. And that person knows when to call legal. And I think this slide pretty much sums it up. When you have a Christmas party, because I remember in 1997, we had a Christmas party at this interactive agency I worked at, and we did not have an HR person. And it was bad, very, very bad. So this is when people start just doing stupid stuff, is when you're around 30 people. So I highly recommend you have somebody who's a grown-up who understands like employee relations, knows the basics of harassment and all that bad stuff. The role of an HR manager will evolve. As your company grows to Series B and Series C, it becomes less of a transactional business partner into more of a strategic partner for the founder, into a chief people officer. And maybe that HR manager has what it takes and they'll grow, but a lot of times what you'll see is the HR manager will get pushed out or they'll hire over them. It's usually not the same person. It's usually a pretty big gap in between those two people. Okay, everyone likes the chart, so either take a picture of it or you'll get it in the deck. Now, I once had somebody start crying when I showed them this because they're like, oh my God, I'm doing everything wrong. Again, this chart was not created by God. It was created by me with the input of my partners. So if you've hired a marketing person at the seed stage, don't freak out. You're going to be okay. This is just a chart. Take it for what it's worth. Absorb. Everyone absorb. Tell me once you've absorbed. Product market fit. If you find a typo, let me know, but I've used it 4 times, so I think we're typo free. Yes. All. Right. But like I said, there are exceptions to the rule. There are companies that will hire a VP of product earlier than my chart says, and that's okay. But this is pretty generic for what we see with our companies.
I don't know if that's really related specifically for the chart.
Okay.
But, so we are a seed stage.
Okay.
But we do need a sales team now.
Yep.
And me not being a salesperson.
Yep.
I have a lot of problems, I think, dealing with them. So I don't know. I was just wondering if you have specific insights about sales.
So you're an exception to the rule. What you're probably going to do at the seed stage is hire a head of sales and hire some, SDRs, sales development reps. You're not going to have just one person who is the player coach. You will have some inside salespeople or SDRs, and you're going to have somebody managing them. Because you have a product, right? Not everybody has a product at the seed stage. You've got something to sell. That's great.
Can I? Okay. So just follow up. And then talking about really, I think what we're looking at the profile of the person, that's this coach or the main player, let's say, who is coaching all the team. Is it something that would you go for experience? So they do have to have the 6-8 years of experience, which
maybe it's 5 to 7, maybe it's 4 to 6. I mean, I'm thinking we have a company that never raised their A, but they had a product that they had a lot of people who wanted to buy it. They hired somebody who was really good, but in my mind, he was fairly junior. He had like 6 years of